change my love the way that you do.
This is the story of a lost neighborhood and of its people who did not want to go.
I don't want no money. I want my home. The old man is old. See how the old man is old? And I'm old. That's enough. I don't want to get out. I said to my two daughters, they don't want to get out too, because they spend a lot of money. Plenty of money they spend in this place. We're not getting out to nobody. Never.
Hi, welcome to the West End Video Newsletter. Tonight we have with us a guest that I love to have on this show because he's always entertaining, and more than that, he knows what he's talking about, and he's always been a populist. So we have Ray Flynn with us tonight, and Ray Flynn has always been the kind of guy, even when he was mayor, that would help the little guy. He came across for the West End when he didn't have to. He wasn't from the West End. I mean, he played basketball against us, and sometimes he even says we beat him up, but he still helped us. So I have to say that the guy is the greatest. I've always said this, I say this, and I'm not saying this because Ray is on my show tonight. I tell everybody that. I said, the only mayor that really went out of his way to help us was Ray Flynn. And Ray, thanks.
It's good to be on your program again, Jim. Thank you.
Yeah, you've been in politics a long time, and you probably know politics better than anybody. I mean, also religion. I mean, when you were over in Rome when the Pope died, unfortunately. You know, the media, you know how to communicate. Even on NBC, they said that, you add a lot to their coverage, you know, because you do know. You knew all that. Matter of fact, the last time, about 2 shows ago when you were on, you had the book you wrote about the Pope, if I remember right.
Right, the accidental Pope, yeah, right. That's right.
That's right.
Jim, I was actually in Rome for 6 weeks. NBC and Fox 25 here in Boston gave me a little contract.
Right.
And I was in Rome before the Pope passed away. I was there for the, at the funeral. The funeral, I like to be able to describe it a little bit for your audience. Sure. It was one of the most extraordinary events that I've ever seen in my life. I mean, I go around to, I was invited to give this speech at the South Boston Branch Library about my experiences, and also in New Jersey, and the Knights of Columbus event. Well, after I got through speaking, I spoke for about an hour and 15 minutes, which is usually long for me. Yeah. And people applauded, but then they took questions for another, I took questions for another hour. I mean, there's this level of interest. And I also covered the inaugural, the conclave, and the inauguration of Benedict XVI, right, who I also have known for many years. Jim, one story, I know there are a number of senior citizens who watch this program, because every time I'm on, I meet people at Filene's basement. They'll say, "Oh, Mayor Flynn, I saw you on Jim Capano's show, West End Newsletter." Well, I know that they'd like this little story. By the way, if there's some parish or some group, and sometime in the future need somebody to kind of fill in, to say a few words at one of their meetings, talk about my experiences knowing John Paul II as I have, knowing the Rome, knowing Benedict XVI. If I can do it, I'd be happy to do it. I've been doing some traveling across the United States quite regularly recently. One little story, Jim. I was doing the 10 o'clock news on national television. 10 o'clock news here in Boston is 4 o'clock in the morning in Rome. There's a 6-hour time differential, and I was doing some other television, international television. Well, I'm walking across the studio. Our studio is overlooking St. Peter's Square. And I'm walking through St. Peter's Square, and I'm going past, I'm walking down Via della Concezione, past Council San Angelo, walking across the Tiber. And as far as my eye could see, it's pitch black in the morning now, and there was literally hundreds of thousands of people. As I walked and walked and walked, I went into this little cafe, and I got a cappuccino and a sweet roll. A bus pulls up, and the bus had driven all night, perhaps all day, from Austria. 2 buses, in fact. weary bus driver gets out of the bus, goes into the cafe, he orders coffee, and he asks, where is the end of this line to pay tribute to John Paul II going up to St. Peter's Basilica? People were waiting. People were waiting for 18 hours, Jim, just to show their respect, awake, to file past the casket of John Paul II. 18 hours they'd now have to wait. They already had traveled over 20 hours, maybe 24 hours. Can you imagine that? Elderly people, young people. I mean, this spectacular event was just extraordinary. The outpouring of respect and admiration. I said to the cameraman from NBC, who was working with me regularly, I said, now, you know, you're an old timer, you've been around a long time, you covered the Vietnam War. I said, is this one of the most spectacular events you've ever seen? How would you rate it, I said. Well, because I had said on TV it was the most spectacular event that I've ever attended.
Right.
Now, I was a young man in the Army when John Kennedy died. He got assassinated on that Friday afternoon. I was stationed right outside of Washington, D.C. When we heard that President Kennedy was assassinated, the base closed. I immediately hitchhiked down to Washington, D.C. in Army uniform, and I literally watched the casket carried into the White House. I also watched the casket being escorted up to the Capitol. I waited in line with everybody else to go in to see the president lying in state. And then I also went down to St. Matthew's Cathedral, where the funeral mass, I walked over to Arlington Cemetery, National Cemetery, for the burial of President Kennedy. Well, that was an extraordinary event in my lifetime, one of the most impacting events that I've ever experienced. The Holy Fathers, John Paul II, had such a huge impact, Jim, because of the fact that there were so many young people there, young people like our kids, our, 25, 30 years old, that traveled all night long, all day long. Police told me that they had estimated that there would be up to 3 million people. They changed their estimation, and they says this is something that they can't even fathom. It was 8 million people that actually paid tribute to John Paul II.
A lot of people didn't get to see him either.
And incredible. I mean, if, you hear all this, the church is in decline, and, what's happened to the dysfunctional Catholic Church, and, it's had its problems, as we both know. But the admiration and respect for John Paul II and for the Catholic faith, the faith of our mother and fathers, and our family that we try to instill in our kids, Jim, is still there. Is still there. I saw it personally.
Yeah, especially and maybe in this country, because there's a lot of that, we'll say, feminists and everything that are, the different things are pulling on the church.
Cultural changes.
Yeah, cultural
changes.
things that are pulling at the church. But most, like my kids, they go to church regularly and everything.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I got 6 kids myself, and I had 11 grandchildren. I far outpace you in the number of grandchildren. What do you got, just 2? You've got a long way to do to catch up. But then, of course, the Irish have been a little bit more prolific than the Italians anyway, especially from South Boston over the West End.
Well, my mother was I think I told you that before. My mother was in South Boston. My mother's Lithuanian, and she came through South Boston.
Yeah.
And
that's where my kids,
exactly.
That's where my kids went to school, the Lithuanian school, St. Peter's School. I mean, Jim, we're so lucky to have that kind of rich diversity, Irish, Italian, Lithuanian, Polish, you in that West End. I mean, look at, it was the United Nations, you had everything there. I love the West End. The only thing about it,
ethnic and racial.
The only thing I didn't like about the West End, I'd get down there and play basketball down there, the old West End house. One day, I think I told you this, and it's on record, I got the scorebook. I got 76 points. That was the easy part. Trying to get out of there alive was the more difficult part. All I remember is running down to Charles Station, jumping over the turnstile, luckily getting into the train, taking me home to South Boston.
Tony Lavolo, who played for the team at that age, tells me similar stories about South Boston.
We were nice to everybody over there. We wouldn't do that.
So it's you know in those days everybody there was a different everybody protected their turf, and there was all this macho stuff and everything.
But I mean the West End house. I remember they had playing basketball. They had a guy named L.D. Moore was black.
Yeah, that's my a good friend of mine's brother.
Really?
Yeah.
And you had Tony DeVolio, Tony Longo.
Longo, yeah. He's down in Florida. Fernando.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And then Roger Jackman.
Roger died, unfortunately.
Roger died.
Yeah.
He used to be the toll boy for the Boston Celtics.
Yeah, that's right.
I was the ball boy. Roger was the was the toll boy for the Celtics. I mean, but the West End, that was like the United Nations. Right. You know what I mean?
Well, the Jackmans, the West End was originally Irish. Up until about 1905, it was largely Irish. Now, when I say almost totally Irish. And the Jackman, Nellie just died a couple of years back, and she was living in Southie, I believe.
She was, yeah.
And Nellie, we have a tape somewhere where Nellie's talking about, an oral history tape on video, where Nellie's talking about how the West End was, the little store that she had, and the way Irish politics was in the West End at that time. Yeah, Mazzini and everybody came out of that.
And you had some good Italian athletes. Tony Magicomo, do you remember that name? We went to Charlestown High School.
Might have been.
Yeah. And then St. Joe's, of course. That was the legendary church.
Oh yeah.
My pastor, Monsignor Powers, wasn't he down at St. Joseph's?
Oh yeah, Father Powers.
Yeah, he was the waterfront chaplain. My father was a dock worker.
Right.
And then
he did. He after they tore the West End down, he moved over. That's right, down a little chapel down by the fish pier.
Yeah, a Lady of Good Voyage.
Yeah. It was, that was with LeMasney, and you know who was the pastor of that church around 1900 and 1905, 1910?
No.
John O'Connor, was it O'Connor? Cardinal O'Connor.
O'Connell.
Yeah.
Oh,
O'Connell, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was the pastor.
I didn't know that.
Matter of fact, if you go up there in front of St. Joseph's, the street that runs around it now, it's named O'Connell Way. You think O'Connell?
Yeah, the O'Connell Way.
O'Connell Way, yeah.
Speaking of that, I really been following some of your efforts there, trying to get some of those Hero Squares markers. You making any success with that? I wish I were the mayor. I'd help you with all that.
It's working out. They're going to do it. They're going to put a memorial back. But what is happening is I'm trying to get them to put all deceased. They want to just put the signs that go torn down, like the square, like so-and-so square, so-and-so square. So they're going to put like whatever names that were on the squares, right? I'm trying to get them to list all the West Enders that, died.
You've had a lot of famous people, but nobody more deserving than those heroes who gave their life up for our. And I think your brother was one of them, wasn't he? Yeah. Your brother was killed in Italy.
Yeah.
For the United States. What, the Air Force?
No, he got wounded 3 times. He fought all the way up through Italy, and matter of fact,
my brother was fought in Vietnam. My brother was a highly decorated Vietnam veteran. My brother Dennis, a Boston fireman. But when he came to Italy, he doesn't like to travel too much. But when he came to Italy to visit me, the first place he went off for was Nettuno, where the famous Anzio beachhead was. Nettuno is that famous cemetery down there. About 7. That's where Roddy Murphy. 7,000 Americans, all the way from Sicily, North Africa, to Monte Cassino, all the way for the liberation of Rome. That's where they're buried.
My brother was in the 88th Division, and they fought from down, and Anzio he wasn't with Anzio because they were going up the middle, and Anzio was like a beachhead landing, trying to get ahead of the Germans.
It was one of the most difficult battles in the whole Second World War.
And my brother was at Monte Cassino. I mean, he made it all the way up to the Po Valley, October 21st, 1944. They were coming back off the line, and some guy stepped on a landmine, took them both out.
I went to Monte Cassino one time with John Paul II, and the Polish resistance waited after the invasion of Poland, September 1st, 1939, and these people weren't prepared.
Well, so what
they did was they waited and waited so that they could fight the Germans, and they fought the Germans and met the Germans after all these years of training in Monte Cassino. More people got killed in that battle of Monte Cassino. Think about it, they were trying to climb this huge hill, which is now a Benedictine.
Unscalable hill.
Yeah, and they were just dropping like flies. But talk about the heroic activity of these Polish, of these Americans, and British troops. I mean, just amazing, amazing.
And that you know, I got to say this: you have a passion for the West End.
I do. I love. I mean,
you know, and that's
it's about
what
America.
Yeah, and what I try to say all the time is because, you know, you really didn't have to because you're not a West Ender. I mean, and I'm not saying that in a bad way. You know what I mean? What I'm saying is
If you love America, you're a West Ender.
you were doing the right thing, right? And you just looked at it and said, that's the right thing to do, and you went and did it. And that I have the utmost respect for you. And, you know, even your son one time, he came, we have, every year we have, at St. Joseph's, we have a mass for deceased West Enders.
Yeah.
And your son came to
By the way, as you know, I'm filling in for Ed.
Right.
Eddie's on active duty in the United States
That's
Navy.
right.
He's down the Naval War College. And so that's why I'm here.
Right.
You know, so
Eddie's also he's pulling papers for the run city
run
council.
for city councilor in Boston. So I never thought that he was interested in politics because right after high school, Jim, 3-4 days afterwards, he signed up for the Navy.
Yeah.
He's been in the Navy since he graduated from Don Bosco High School.
Yeah, a long time.
And so, I mean, in the reserves. But I'm glad he's home. He's got a wife and a little baby and expecting another little baby.
And I think this way, as a city council, I think he'll make a great city councilor for the one reason, like I say, he came to I sent you the newsletter and everything.
Yeah, I read all the time.
So he read the newsletter and he seen that we were having a mass and he showed up and it amazed me, you know, because, you know, it's sort of a West End cultural thing and that he took that much interest in the neighborhood, right? And he wasn't, at that time he wasn't running for anything.
Well, I did something right, I guess.
You know, he wasn't running, he just came in and you don't know how much I appreciate that. Matter of fact, I had him on the show after that. I said, you know, he's such a nice kid and everything, just to go out and do that, you know. You sure you weren't in the West End? You guys show a lot of...
I still hold the animosity about the date I got beat up down there.
Yeah. And, you know, you've always been a fighter. I mean, you had great people. When you were mayor, you could leave the city, and the city would run by itself, because when you had one great ability. I mean, you're a good mayor in its own, but you had all good people around you.
I try to bring in a lot of good
right,
people.
yeah.
I have Mickey Roach and Steve Coyle. I mean, there's never been a better director
before or
for
after,
VRA. I mean, just an extraordinary guy. And Leo Stapleton, fire commissioner.
Right.
I mean, yeah, we had some real talented people. You know what it was, Jim? I played on what was probably one of the best basketball teams in the country, Providence College, and I was the captain of it.
Right.
And people used to say, Joe Mulaney was our coach. Joe Mulaney was a legendary coach. After he coached us, he was so good that the Los Angeles Lakers, who were world champions with the Boston Celtics, hired him as their coach. And they said to Joe Mulaney, the reason why we're hiring you is because you have such a talent for getting people to work together. I never forgot that. I played for two coaches. I played for Joe Mulaney, and I had a brief opportunity to play for Red Auerbach before I got cut by the Boston Celtics. But nonetheless, two men that
was in an 8-team league.
Yeah, that's right, too. Two men that I greatly admired, and, you know, I was able to play a lot with Joe Mulaney. I only could play a short while with Red Auerbach, but nevertheless, I had the opportunity of getting to know what sports, what it's about, and what teamwork is about. And that's why I brought in good team players at City Hall, whose agenda was not personal glorification. Their agenda was serving the people of the city of Boston. I had a little sign at my desk in City Hall, and it says, if the phone call comes in and you find you get annoyed with it, that's the time to quit.
Right.
And that's the way I felt.
Well, you were a hands-on mayor, and I guess, you know, some people like to call themselves the neighborhood mayors, but you were really the neighborhood mayor. You were out in the streets, right? You were everywhere. You were a fighter for everybody's rights, and you won big all the time in Boston.
I used to say, Jim, you can't run the city from City Hall. You have to be out in the neighborhoods to understand what people are really saying and how they feel.
What do you think about running for governor in 2006?
You know, it's funny, on my way in here tonight, a fella said to me, can a guy like you, with your, as you described me, this populist sentiment, that kind of hands-on neighborhood, little people politics, can a person like that get elected anymore? Could a person like that become a governor? Or is it all about money? Is it all about the media? powerful special interest groups? You know, that's a good question. I mean, if you look at what's happening recently, it's true. It is money.
It is money.
It is media. And it is powerful special interest groups. But, you know, you never know.
Every once in a while, somebody sneaks in.
Absolutely. And particularly if you look at the field. I mean, if the field is, you know, 3 establishment candidates and one person that could legitimately lay claim to working class people.
That's right.
And working class people know that person and know that reputation, and no media is going to talk them out of it or try to distort that record.
If I remember right, you weren't the favorite of that race for mayor.
If you look at that 83 election, I was 17 points behind. I had no politicians supporting me.
Right.
I had no media supporting me. I had little money, very little money. I spent $200,000. You know, at that time, they said it cost $1 million, $2 million. I had $200,000. But what people didn't know is I had been over the track. I had been out in those neighborhoods. I had worked with those people. I mean, I'll bet you just this program here, I'll bet everybody who's interested in the West End, you know, they could be living in Stoughton or Saugus or Canton or wherever. I'll bet you if they ever saw Ray Flynn's name on the ballot, they'd say, I remember him. Sure, he's my kind of guy.
He's the one that put everything in place for the West End place. Or else that would have been a whole different type of building. I mean, as it turned out, we didn't get as much as we should have because things changed. But it probably wouldn't have even happened if it wasn't for Ray Flynn.
So
that I got to say.
I won't declare my candidacy for governor of Massachusetts here tonight, Jim. But to answer that guy's question, walking in the door, and to answer your question, yeah, I think that a person like me can get elected governor of Massachusetts. I think there's still room in politics for people who have a close connection to working class people, and I think people are savvy enough to support that kind of person. And more importantly, I think that's exactly what the state needs.
I agree, especially with the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, it's being run by, I guess what the word I'm looking for, they call themselves progressives, but what they are, see, the Democratic Party used to have a big tent, okay? And you could be against this issue or that issue and still stay. The reason we have 51% independence in this state, where it was largely Democratic up to, I think we were what, 50-something or 60% Democratic at one point?
Sure.
They've been pushed out of the party.
Sure.
All you have to do is like you. You ran for Congress, right? And what was the thing? Abortion, abortion, abortion,
He's
abortion.
pro-life.
Yeah, pro-life, pro-life, pro-life.
Yeah.
Had nothing to do with it. But because if you're any of those things, like we'll say you're pro-gun, anti-gun control or whatever, you know, you take one little, anywhere down the line, right? If you split from the litany or the agenda in any way, okay, what happens is they like push you out of the picture. You have to be, it's a new Puritan.
But see, what you need, that's why you need money and you need organization. Because even if I'm, as I am, pro-life, pro-family, pro-poor, pro-working class, pro-human rights, even though I am all of those things, the fact is that there are a lot of people out there who agree with those things.
I agree, sure.
And what you need, however, is you need the money and you need the organization to bring them together.
You know, we also have the West End Museum. Okay.
Absolutely.
What we're also looking to see if we can raise some money. Okay, and I would like to, if anybody out there knows a fundraiser or would like to donate to the West End Museum, would be interested in, you know, we have the number for you on the screen. So you can call up and you know, leave your name and address or whatever, or you can send the money to the West End Museum, P.O. Box 8996, Boston, Mass. 02114. But we could desperately use the money, and we're doing some great things. So we have the exhibit from the Old Bostonian Society that they put up about the West End in '92, and it won an award. It's a really good exhibit, but we need money to put it together. So if anybody out there would be interested in donating or helping out, we'd love to have you. And now,
Jim,
after that commercial,
can I tell you one little thing about the museum? In fact, you saw me. I was moving, I was with my wife. We were waiting in line to go into the Democratic National Convention, As you recall, I was
Right.
waiting there with David Rednoy,
Right.
my dear friend who since passed away from WBZ, and we're chatting away and chatting
Mm-hmm.
away. But right in front of us was Tim Russett
Mhm.
from NBC, a longtime friend of
Right.
mine as well. So I talked to you,
Right.
and you and I were chatting. Tim Russett was in front, and I says, you know who that is? And I says, that's Jim Capano, West End. And he's looking at me, and I says, West End is one of the most extraordinary stories in America today.
Yeah.
I went on to tell him the injustice
Right.
that took place in the West End
Mhm.
and how people got really devastated and they got robbed of their property because of callous criminal decisions
Right.
made by people in power. And it never should have happened, and even to this day, they should be rewarded for
Yeah.
what happened to them.
Mhm.
And you know what? I think that if you're able to get this message the way you just described it
Mhm.
to the audience out there, the people will say, hey, we have an obligation to fund this museum. You know why? Because it not only is something that happened in the past,
Right.
if we don't watch it, and if we're not reminded, this could happen
Voltaire,
again.
wasn't
Look, I built the Holocaust Memorial
Yeah, right. I remember
in
that.
downtown Boston.
Right.
And I did that because my dear friend Steve Ross
Right.
told me, he said-
Mike's father.
Mike's father,
Right.
he says, Ray, we work together as youth workers.
Mhm.
And he says, Ray, if we don't do this, people will forget.
That's right.
And I says, okay, Steve, wherever you pick out a location in Boston, and I'll put it there. He says, how about right next to James Michael Curley? I said, you have it.
Right.
So, some people were complaining about it, and understandably, but that's where it went.
Mhm.
And you got your museum, you got a good location for it there.
Yeah, we do.
You got a good location, but what people now have to do is step
Fund
up
it,
to the
yeah.
plate and fund it. People come out of the woodwork with stories and memorabilia, and too bad our friend Jerry Williams wasn't around. He had some great stories too.
Yeah.
But the West End is not about the West End, not
Right.
just about the West End. It's about America.
Yeah, Voltaire, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
So that's, and the West End is not only that, it's a classic story. It's a classic story of eminent domain and urban renewal. People don't realize the things that happen under eminent domain and urban renewal. And unfortunately, I can't go into it much deeper because we're coming to the end of our 29 minutes. So, Ray, thank you for coming.
Good to be with you, Jim.
Appreciate this.
Thank you. Yeah.
And,
Ed will be back there if you invite Ed. Ed will be back there. He'll come
sure,
back from the Navy.
We'll have him sometime when he's set. You have him give me a call when he's available, and we'll do him. He's a great kid.
He's a nice kid.
And I'm not saying that because he's your son. I'm not that kind of guy.
I'm surprised he's
as
getting
you
in
know.
politics, but I'm delighted he's getting in politics because he'll do a good job because he's, that's what he wants to do. He likes to help people.
Yeah, I think he'll be all right at it.
Yeah, good.
Anyways, I'll see you at the next West End video newsletter. That's the show.